why do we feel more lost the more options we have? We think of freedom as choice. The more choices we have, the freer we are, right? That's what modern life keeps telling us. You scroll through thousands of songs, hundreds of shows, infinite dating profiles, endless career paths. And yet we're more anxious, more indecisive, more regretful than ever before. So what's going on here? Why does it feel like the freedom of choice is actually paralyzing us? Today we're diving into a philosophical riddle hiding in plain sight, how abundance breeds confusion, and how too many choices are leading you to make worse decisions. This is not just about consumer psychology. This is existential. This is about your life, your energy, your time. Because each choice you face, every menu, every app, every what do I do next, isn't just a decision. It's a burden, a mental and emotional tax. And this tax is slowly eating away at your ability to choose well. We're going to explore the psychology, the philosophy, and the real-world consequences of this epidemic of excess. And by the end of this journey, you'll have a radically different understanding of freedom, clarity, and choice. But first, let me ask you something unsettling. If you could do anything with your life, why haven't you? Let that sit for a moment. We're constantly told that we live in an age of unprecedented opportunity. You can be anything, learn anything, go anywhere. But the irony is, the more choices we have, the less we seem to move.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Like a person staring at 100 doors, but never walking through any of them. This is what psychologists call the paradox of choice. The more options you have, the harder it is to choose. The harder it is to choose, the more likely you are to avoid choosing altogether or to make a choice you later regret. Why? Because with each new option, your brain starts running simulations. What if I pick this and miss out on that? What if I commit and something better comes along? What if I get it wrong? And suddenly you're not free. You're trapped in a maze of hypotheticals, a prisoner of possibility. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Philosophers like Kierkegaard and Sartre talked about this centuries before we had streaming platforms or dating apps. They knew that freedom wasn't just liberating, it was terrifying. Because real freedom means responsibility. No structure, no path, just you staring into the vastness of potential. And when faced with that vastness, most of us panic. We retreat into distraction. We numb ourselves with scrolling, consumption, comparison. Because it's easier to binge watch someone else's story than to write your own. But here's the thing, every choice is a sacrifice. To choose one path is to abandon all others. That's the weight of real choice. And when you're faced with 100 options, you're also faced with 100 potential regrets. That's why you feel stuck. Not because you don't have options, but because you have too many. And here's the deeper philosophical conflict. We confuse possibility with purpose. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's aligned with your deepest self. But when you're overwhelmed by options, it becomes harder to hear your inner voice. You start choosing based on fear of missing out, fear of judgment, fear of failure instead of choosing from clarity. So let's pause. Ask yourself this, Are the choices in your life leading you toward who you want to become, or are they just keeping you busy? That's the question that splits the path. Because if you want to live a meaningful life, not just a busy one, you have to decide not just what to choose, but how to choose. And that begins with understanding the cost of excess. Imagine this. You walk into a grocery store with 47 kinds of peanut butter. At first you feel empowered. Look at all these options. But then you start comparing ingredients, prices, brands, health claims. You spend 10 minutes staring. You finally choose one. But on the way home, you wonder, did I pick the wrong one? What if that organic brand was better? What if I missed out? This is called decision fatigue. It's real. And it's not just about peanut butter. Every time you make a decision, no matter how small, you use up a little bit of your cognitive energy. And in a world where we're bombarded with choices every hour, that energy depletes fast. So what happens? You either make worse choices as the day goes on, or you avoid choosing altogether. You default to autopilot. You scroll mindlessly. You eat what's easy. You stay in relationships, jobs, or routines that no longer serve you because change feels too overwhelming. And this leads to a kind of spiritual numbness. You're alive, but you're not directing your life. You're reacting, not creating. And that's the tragedy. Because decision is the birthplace of destiny. But when decisions become noise instead of signal, we lose our connection to what matters. Now here comes the twist, the part that might sting a little. Choice is not the problem. The illusion of unlimited choice is. We've been sold a lie that more options, more freedom. But freedom is not about having infinite doors. It's about knowing which door leads to you. Clarity is the real superpower, and clarity doesn't come from more options. It comes from self-awareness, from asking, what do I value? What am I willing to suffer for? What path requires courage, not comfort? Because once you know who you are, most choices become irrelevant. You don't need to compare 50 career paths. You know what mission calls to you. You don't need to date 200 people. You know what kind of love you're seeking. You don't need to chase every trend. You know what timeless truth you stand for. But to get there, you have to go through something most of us avoid. You have to close doors. You have to say no to good things to say yes to great ones. You have to accept that you will miss out on certain experiences because you are choosing one life instead of trying to live every life. And that's not failure. That's maturity. When you stop trying to keep every option open and start living fully into the one you've chosen, you stop scattering your energy. You become powerful. You become focused. You become alive. Because now your choices are not just reactions. They're acts of creation. So here's the challenge. Where in your life are you choosing distraction over direction? What decisions have you been avoiding because there are too many options? And what would happen if, instead of asking what's the best choice, you asked, which choice brings me closer to my highest self? That's the question that cuts through the noise. That's the question that reclaims your power. Because the world will not slow down. It will keep throwing options at you, more content, more opinions, more paths. But the way out is not to escape the chaos. It's to rise above it, to become someone who chooses with intention, not impulse. To become someone who sees clearly, even when surrounded by fog. That is freedom. Not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to do what matters. And that freedom begins the moment you stop chasing every option and start committing to your path. We ended the last part with a bold idea. Freedom isn't about having every option, it's about committing to the right one. But this idea clashes violently with something we've all been told from the moment we were old enough to dream. You have infinite potential. You can be anything, do anything, become anyone. And at first, that sounds like empowerment. But if you look closely, it's not always a gift. Sometimes it's a curse. Because when you believe you can become anything, you never become someone. You stay trapped in a fog of possibilities. You keep one foot in every door, terrified of closing any of them. You say yes to too much, afraid that saying no means giving up on your destiny. But here's the hard truth. Saying yes to everything is a fast track to becoming nothing. Let's go deeper. The myth of infinite potential sounds beautiful on paper, but in practice, it creates an unbearable pressure. What if I pick the wrong thing? What if I waste my talent? What if there's something better I should be doing? And suddenly, every moment becomes a source of anxiety. Every choice becomes a test. Every mistake becomes a crisis. You don't just want to make a good decision, you want to make the perfect one. But perfection is a mirage, and chasing it leads to paralysis. This is what philosopher Barry Schwartz called the tyranny of choice. Not just that more options make us more anxious, but that they make us less satisfied, even when we choose well. Because when you have 100 options, every decision comes with a haunting feeling. What if one of the ones I didn't pick was better? And so, even when you succeed, you feel like you failed. This is deeper than psychology. It's existential. Because to live well is not just to choose, it's to let go, to grieve the lives you didn't live, but to accept that you will never explore every possibility, that you will not master every skill, that you will not marry every soulmate. And that's not a tragedy. That's what makes your life yours. The person who tries to be everything becomes no one. But the person who dares to say no, who dares to focus, to simplify, to commit, they become someone real. So here's the counterintuitive truth. Saying no is not a limitation. It's liberation. It's the act of choosing your story. It's the act of stepping out of the fog of what if and into the clarity of this is. But to do that, you have to confront something terrifying, the death of potential. Because every time you say yes to a path, you are burying 1,000 others. And that feels like loss. But it's also birth. Because only when you close the doors that don't matter can you walk fully through the one that does. Let me ask you something uncomfortable. What doors are you leaving open just in case? That career you haven't committed to? That relationship you're half invested in? That dream you keep preparing for but never actually pursue? What would happen if you burned the backup plan? Would you finally move? Would you finally go all in? Or are you still waiting for perfect certainty before you act? Newsflash, certainty never comes. The most important decisions in life, who you love, what you dedicate yourself to, What you believe, they don't come with guarantees. They come with faith. They come with courage. They come with the willingness to say, this is what I choose, even if I'll never know what could have been. And that's what separates the regretful from the fulfilled. Not that they made perfect choices, but that they owned their choices. They didn't live trying to keep every door open. They became someone who could walk through one door and not look back. That's the soul of commitment. And in a world obsessed with flexibility, commitment has become revolutionary. Because commitment requires presence. You can't be sort of in love. You can't be kind of courageous. You can't be halfway alive. You either show up fully or you don't show up at all. But we're scared of that level of intensity. So we keep one foot out. We hedge. We prepare exit strategies. We wait for signs. We delay. And in doing so, we rob ourselves of the power that comes from full engagement. Because here's the secret. When you go all in on one thing, the universe conspires. Your energy aligns. Your focus sharpens. Your creativity ignites. You stop wasting bandwidth on what if and start building what is. You stop asking, what else could I do? And start asking, how deep can I go? That's mastery. That's purpose. That's fulfillment. And it only comes when you stop trying to be everything and start becoming someone. So let's get brutally honest. What are you really afraid of committing to? Is it that project? That person? That vision of who you could be? And what are you using choices as an excuse for? Because sometimes we use options as a shield. We pretend we're still exploring when really we're just afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of missing out. Afraid of becoming someone real. Because that means we can't hide behind potential anymore. But here's the twist. You don't need more options. You need more ownership. You don't need more information. You need more intention. You don't need to be everything. You need to be you, fully, fiercely, unapologetically. And that means saying no 1,000 times to distractions, to false paths, to the illusion of infinite futures, so you can say yes to the one life that's calling your name. That's not limitation. That's liberation. And it's waiting for you on the other side of no. We've arrived at the final truth. It's not just the number of choices that's hurting us, it's our refusal to decide. We think that by keeping our options open, we're staying free. But in reality, we're just postponing life. And every moment we delay a decision, a part of us dims, a part that longs for direction, for momentum, for meaning. The tragedy of too many choices isn't just cognitive overload. It's existential inertia. You become a person who is always planning, always pondering, always preparing, but never living. We've been taught to worship reflection and to analyze everything, to wait until we feel totally ready. But readiness is a lie. You don't feel ready because you're not supposed to. You're supposed to feel uncertain. That's how you know it's real. The great philosopher William James once said, "When you have to make a choice and don't make it, that is in itself a choice." And that choice? It's usually fear. Fear disguised as logic. Caution dressed up as wisdom. But those who move, those who decide, they shape the world. They make things happen. They build momentum. Because clarity doesn't come before action, it comes through it. You don't become confident and then act. You act, and then you become confident. Because the brain learns from experience, not contemplation. So here's what I'm asking you to consider right now. What are you waiting to be 100% sure of that you already know in your heart is right? That job you keep researching, that call you've been meaning to make, that leap you've been postponing for the right moment. What if you stopped researching and started becoming? What if you made the choice today not because it's perfect, but because it's yours? Every decisive moment in history was made by someone who was unsure. But they moved anyway. And that's the difference between a life of regret and a life of meaning. You don't need more time. You don't need more options. You need to decide, to pick your path, own your life. Because in the end, it's not the number of choices you had that matters, it's what you did with them. The people who change the world aren't the ones with infinite potential. They're the ones who choose. And then keep choosing, every day, even when it's hard. So ask yourself, right now, what decision am I avoiding that could change everything? Go make it. That's where your power is. That's where your life is.